Each night a human cooked snacks for hungry dragon hatchlings. Unaware their mother ruled the origin star. An HFY story in 3 parts. Part 1, The Night Visitor. Myra had been alone on 7 for 43 days when she noticed the food was disappearing. At first, she thought she was imagining it. The research station was small, just a collection of metal buildings sitting on a rocky hill above an endless forest of purple trees. She was the only person there. The main team had left for the seasonal rotation, and Myra had stayed behind to watch the hydroponics bays and tend to the plant samples. It was quiet work, lonely work, but Myra did not mind. She had her books, her music, and her cooking. Every evening she made herself something special: spiced jerky from the protein printer, dried fruit she had brought from Earth, little treats to make the empty days feel less empty. Except now those treats were vanishing. The emergency rations remained untouched. The nutritional paste sat in neat rows on its shelf, but her jerky was gone. Her dried apples had disappeared. Even the small bag of candied ginger her mother had sent in her last care package was empty. Myra checked the station logs. No one had come or gone. She checked the security system, nothing unusual. She walked through every room and looked in every corner. She found nothing. On the 45th night, she set up a camera. She placed a fresh batch of jerky on the kitchen counter and pointed her personal tablet at it. Then she went to bed, though she did not sleep well. She kept thinking about what could be stealing her food. A local animal that had found its way inside. Some kind of pest. The planet was supposed to be safe, but frontier worlds always had surprises. In the morning, the jerky was gone. Myra grabbed her tablet and played back the recording. For hours, nothing happened. The kitchen sat empty and dark. Then, shortly after midnight, the ventilation grate in the ceiling moved. 3 small shapes dropped down onto the counter. Myra paused the video and stared. They were about the size of cats. They had scales that shimmered between black and deep purple in the low light. They had wings folded against their backs. They had long tails and bright eyes that seemed to glow faintly gold. They looked like dragons. Myra watched the rest of the recording in silence. The creatures moved carefully, checking for danger before approaching the food. One of them chirped softly, and another responded with a low rumble. They communicated. They worked together. When they found the jerky, they did not fight over it. They divided it into 3 equal portions and ate slowly, savoring each bite. Then they cleaned up. They picked up every crumb. They arranged the remaining items on the counter exactly as Myra had left them. They slipped back up through the ventilation grate and disappeared. Myra sat back in her chair. Her hands were shaking slightly. She should report this. Unknown alien life forms had entered the station. Protocol was clear. She needed to call for a quarantine team, seal the ventilation system, and evacuate until specialists could assess the situation. But she thought about what would happen then. Teams in hazard suits, traps and cages. The creatures taken away to be studied, poked, prodded, maybe dissected. She thought about how carefully they had divided their food, how they had cleaned up after themselves, how one of them had patted another gently with its wing before they left. Myra made a decision. That evening, she did not set a trap. Instead, she cooked. She made a fresh batch of jerky, spiced with chili and garlic the way she liked it. She added some roasted nuts and a few pieces of dried mango. She arranged everything on a plate and left it on the counter. Then she dimmed the lights, sat down in the corner of the kitchen, and waited. It took 2 hours. The grate moved slowly. A small head poked out, golden eyes scanning the room. Myra held her breath. The creature spotted her and froze. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Myra slowly raised her hand and waved. The creature tilted its head. It made a soft sound like a question. 2 more heads appeared beside it. They looked at Myra. They looked at the food. They looked at each other. The first one dropped down onto the counter. Myra did not move. She barely breathed. The creature approached the plate slowly, eyes never leaving her face. It sniffed the jerky. Its tail swished back and forth. Then it took a piece and bit into it. It chirped loudly. The other 2 immediately dropped down to join it. Within minutes, the plate was empty. The creatures sat together in a small pile, making satisfied, rumbling sounds. One of them burped. Another one nuzzled it with its snout. Myra laughed. She could not help it. The sound surprised them and they tensed. But when she did not move, they relaxed again. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm Myra. I guess you like my cooking." The largest one looked at her with those bright golden eyes. It made a sound that might have been a word. Myra did not understand it, but she smiled anyway. "I'll make more tomorrow," she said, "if you want to come back." They came back every night after that. Myra cooked for them each evening. She experimented with different recipes, noting which ones they liked best. High protein, slightly charred. Certain spices made them chirp with excitement. Others made them sneeze. She gave them names. The largest one with the darkest scales she called Ember. The middle one, gray and quick, was Smoke. The smallest, pale silver with a crooked wing, was Ash. They learned her name too, sort of. They could not quite pronounce it, but they made a sound that was close. "Ah," they would chirp when she entered the kitchen each evening. "Ah, ah." Weeks passed. The hatchlings, as she had started thinking of them, grew bolder. They no longer fled when she moved. They let her sit closer. Sometimes, when they were very full and very sleepy, they would curl up on the counter and let her watch them rest. One night, Ember brought her something. It was a stone, smooth and round, gray with flecks of green. Ember dropped it at her feet and looked up at her expectantly. "For me?" Myra asked. Ember chirped. After that, they brought her things regularly, mostly stones, pretty ones, interesting ones, a feather from some local bird, a piece of crystal that caught the light. Myra kept them all in a bowl on her desk. Then, on the 62nd night, Ember brought her something different. It was a shard, no bigger than her thumb. It glowed faintly, pulsing with inner light. When Myra touched it, it felt warm, almost alive. She scanned it with her equipment. The results made no sense. The device identified it as stabilized dark matter, which was impossible. Dark matter could not be stabilized. It existed only in theoretical physics papers. It should not be sitting in her palm, humming gently against her skin. Myra looked up. The three hatchlings were watching her, tails swishing contentedly. Smoke was licking the last traces of honey glaze from the plate. Ash was trying to climb onto her lap. "What are you?" Myra whispered. Ember blinked at her with those golden eyes. It did not answer. It just curled up beside its siblings and closed its eyes, trusting her completely. Myra sat in the quiet kitchen, holding a piece of impossible matter, surrounded by creatures that should not exist. She did not know what they were. She did not know where they came from. But she knew one thing for certain. She was not going to let anyone take them away. Part 2. The Mother's Gaze. 6 weeks changed everything. The hatchlings no longer hid in the ventilation shafts. They had a nest now, built in the corner of Myra's quarters. She had given them blankets and soft things, and they had arranged everything to their liking. Each morning, she woke to find them curled together in a pile of scales and wings. Each evening, they waited for her at the kitchen door, chirping impatiently until she started cooking. They had grown. When they first arrived, they were the size of cats. Now they were closer to large dogs. Ember's head reached Myra's waist. Smoke could spread his wings wide enough to knock things off shelves. Ash had gained weight and confidence, though her crooked wing still did not fold quite right. They had also learned to speak. Not perfectly. Their mouths were not made for human words, but they had picked up enough. Ah had become Myra. Food and please and thank you came easily. More spicy was a frequent request. Sometimes, when Myra told them stories before bed, they would repeat words back to her. "Dragon," they would say, pointing at themselves with their tails. "Human," they would say, pointing at her. "Friend." Myra kept detailed logs of everything. Their growth patterns, their food preferences, the words they learned. She told herself it was scientific documentation, but really she just wanted to remember every moment. She also documented the strange things. The station's sensors had started picking up anomalies. Deep beneath the ground, almost beyond the range of her equipment, There was something massive, a structure of some kind. Her instruments could not tell her what it was. They just knew it was there, sitting in the bedrock like a buried secret. Ships had appeared in orbit too, not human ships, not any design Myra recognized. They came once every few days, circled the planet slowly, and left again. They never tried to contact her. They never landed. They just watched. Myra tried not to think about what it meant. One evening, while she was preparing dinner, the station's communication system activated. It was a news broadcast from the Galactic Network. Myra usually ignored these. The frontier was far from the center of things, and the news rarely mattered to her small life on this small world. But the headline caught her attention. Sovereignty makes contact after 10,000 years. Myra turned up the volume. The reporter spoke in excited tones. They were ancient, she said, older than most spacefaring civilizations. They had kept to themselves for refusing all contact with the younger species. But now their matriarch, Sovereign, had sent a delegation to the Galactic Council. No one knew why. Scholars were speculating wildly. The screen showed images. Myra's breath stopped. There were dragons. Not the small, playful creatures sleeping in her quarters. These were enormous. The images showed beings the size of buildings, covered in scales darker than space itself. They had wings that could block out suns. They had eyes that burned with actual fire. They moved with a weight and presence that made the diplomatic hall look like a toy. The broadcast continued. They ruled from a world called the Origin Star. It was the mythical birthplace of their kind. Legends said it was the first world to hold life in the galaxy. The sovereign who ruled from its throne was said to be 40,000 years old. Myra turned slowly and looked at Ember, Smoke, and Ash. They were watching the screen too. Their golden eyes were fixed on the images of the massive dragons. Ember made a soft sound. It was not a word. It was something deeper, something instinctive. Myra's hands had started to shake. 3 days later, the station received a priority communication. A diplomatic vessel was en route to 7. No explanation was given. Estimated arrival time, 72 hours. Myra read the message 5 times. Then she sat down heavily on her bed. Ember climbed up beside her and pressed his head against her side. Smoke wrapped his tail around her ankle. Ash chirped with concern. "It's okay," Myra said, but her voice was hollow. That night, the hatchlings were restless. They kept trying to lead her somewhere. They would run to the door, then back to her, then to the door again. Ember grabbed the hem of her shirt in his teeth and pulled. "You want me to follow you?" Myra asked. Ember nodded, actually nodded. It was the most human gesture she had ever seen him make. Myra grabbed a flashlight and let them lead her out of the station. They went down into the caves. There was a passage behind the station that Myra had never explored. It went deep into the hill, far past the depth of her surveys. The hatchlings moved confidently through the darkness. They knew the way. They had been here before. The passage opened into a chamber. Myra stopped and stared. It was vast. Her flashlight could not reach the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, and everywhere, covering every surface, were shells. Eggshells. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. They were large, each one big enough to hold a creature the size of the hatchlings. Most were broken and empty. Some were ancient, crumbling to dust. But a few were newer. 3 of them near the center of the chamber were clearly recent. Myra walked to them. She touched the jagged edge of one. It was still faintly warm. "This is where you were born," she whispered. Ember pressed against her leg. Beyond the shells, there was another chamber. Myra walked through an archway of carved stone and found herself in a space even larger than the first. This one was not a nursery. It was a hall. A throne room, perhaps. Everything was built to enormous scale. A single chair carved from black stone sat against the far wall. It was big enough to seat one of those massive dragons she had seen on the news broadcast. Words were carved into the walls. Myra's translator struggled with them. The language was old, ancient, but slowly pieces became clear. Warnings, blessings, a history of births and deaths and waiting. And one phrase, repeated again and again, larger than all the others. The mother, WATCHES. Myra understood then. This was not a random colony world. The survey team had not chosen this location by chance. This place was sacred, a nesting ground hidden for thousands of years, and the 3 small dragons who had been stealing her food, who had learned to say please and thank you, who slept in a nest of blankets in her quarters. They were royal, the children of the sovereign herself. Myra sank to her knees. Ember, smoke, and ash gathered around her. They did not understand why she was upset. They just knew she was, and they wanted to help. "I've been feeding you honey-glazed jerky," she said. Her voice cracked. "I let you sleep on my bed. I taught you human words." Ember buted his head against her shoulder. "Good," he said. "Good Myra." She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. They returned to the station just before dawn. Myra made breakfast. She cooked extra. She did not know how many more meals they would share. The next day, her communicator crackled. The ship had arrived early. A voice came through the speakers. It was deep and ancient. It spoke in perfect human standard, but there was something beneath it, something vast, something that made Myra's bones ache just to hear. "Human," the voice said, "you have something that belongs to me." Myra looked at the hatchlings. They had pressed themselves against her legs. They were shaking. She took a deep breath. Then she picked up the communicator. "Yes," she said, "I do." Part 3, What the Dragon Learned. The ship descended like a mountain, falling from the sky. It was not built of metal. Myra could see that now, as it blocked out the morning sun. It was made of something else. Stone and scale and ancient magic that her instruments could not measure. It was less a vessel and more a living temple, a cathedral that flew through stars. Myra stood outside the research station. The hatchlings were with her. She had tried to get them to stay inside. She had begged them to hide, but they refused. Ember had looked at her with those golden eyes and said a word he had never used before. Family. So they stood together, the 4 of them, as the ship touched down and the ground shook beneath its weight. A door opened in the ship's side. Light poured out, golden and terrible. Shapes moved within it. Guards, Myra realized. Each one was larger than a house. They wore armor that gleamed like captured starlight. They looked at Myra the way a human might look at an insect. Then the sovereign emerged. Myra had seen the images on the news. She had thought she was prepared. She was not. Was vast. Her body blocked the sun entirely. Her scales were darker than void space, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Her wings could have wrapped around the entire research station, and her eyes, when they opened to look at Myra, contained actual burning stars. The weight of her presence was physical. Myra felt it pressing down on her, trying to drive her to her knees. The air grew thick. The ground cracked. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything except stand in the path of this ancient and terrible power. But the hatchlings were pressed against her legs. They were shaking. They needed her. Myra stayed standing. The sovereign lowered her massive head until one of those star-filled eyes was level with Myra. It was bigger than Myra's entire body. The heat of it made her skin prickle. "Human," the voice was not spoken. It arrived directly in Myra's mind. "You stand before the sovereign of the origin star. You have kept my children from me for many cycles. Explain yourself." Myra's throat was dry. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely think. But she had spent weeks preparing for this moment, even when she did not know it would come. She had her logs. She had her records. She had the truth. "I did not keep them," she said. Her voice shook, but she kept speaking. "They came to me. They were hungry. They were stealing my food, so I cooked for them." The sovereign was silent. Her eye did not blink. "I did not know what they were," Myra continued. "I just knew they were small and hungry and smart. I knew they were scared at first. I knew they learned to trust me. I knew," she swallowed. "I knew I loved them." The sovereign's eye narrowed. "You fed them," she said. "Show me." Myra pulled out her tablet. Her hands were trembling so badly she almost dropped it. She called up her logs, every meal documented, every recipe noted, the nutritional analysis she had done to make sure they were eating well, the records of their growth, their preferences, their words. The sovereign studied the tablet. Information flowed from it into her mind. Minutes passed in silence. Then something unexpected happened. The hatchlings moved. Ember stepped forward first. He placed himself between Myra and the sovereign. Smoke and ash followed, forming a protective wall. They began to speak. Not in human words, not entirely. They spoke in the ancient language of their kind, but mixed with it were the words Myra had taught them. Good, they said, kind, friend, please, thank you. And then, in perfect unison, they said a word that made the sovereign's great eye widen. Second mother. The silence that followed was absolute. Then slowly, impossibly, the sovereign began to lower herself. Her massive body settled onto the ground. Her head bowed. It was not a gesture of attack. It was something else entirely. It was a bow. The guards behind her shifted uneasily. Myra heard them murmuring in their ancient tongue. Whatever was happening, they had not expected it. Human, the sovereign said. Her voice had changed. It was still vast, still ancient, but something in it had softened. Do you know what you have done? Myra shook her head. My children were hidden here during a time of conflict. Their guardian was killed. They were lost. I have searched for them for 3 of your human years. I feared them dead. The sovereign's eye focused on the hatchlings, and for a moment, Myra saw something that looked almost like tenderness. Instead, I find them healthy, growing, speaking words of a language they should not know, defending a creature they should have no bond with. She turned back to Myra. Among my kind, there is a law older than the stars themselves. Hatchlings do not bond to those who birth them. They bond to those who feed them. It is our oldest tradition. The one who nourishes the young earns their loyalty forever. Myra felt her legs grow weak. You cooked for my children, the sovereign continued. Every night, you learned their preferences, you gave them names, you let them sleep in your dwelling. You did not do this for reward. You did not do this for power. You did it because they were hungry and you had food to share. The great eye blinked. By the oldest law of my people, you have earned a place in my bloodline. You are nest friend to royal heirs. You are recognized by the throne of the origin star. No human has held such a position in 40,000 years. Myra opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I just made them dinner, she finally managed. The sovereign made a sound. It took Myra a moment to realize it was a laugh. Yes, she said, you did. And in doing so, you accomplished what 10,000 years of diplomacy could not. You taught my children kindness in a language they will never forget. She rose then, her massive body blocking out the sky once more. But the weight of her presence had changed. It was still vast, still ancient, but it was no longer crushing. I offer you a choice, human. Return to your people with honors beyond measure. Wealth, fame, protection, anything you desire, or... She paused. Come with us. Come to the origin star. Continue what you have begun. Raise my children alongside me. Myra looked at Ember, Smoke, and Ash. They were staring up at her with those golden eyes, waiting, hopping. She thought about Earth, about her family, her friends, the life she had known. She thought about the small research station on this small world at the edge of mapped space. Then she thought about the 3 small dragons who had stolen her food and her heart, who had brought her shiny rocks and impossible crystals, who had learned to say please and thank you and more spicy. I have one question, Myra said. The sovereign waited. Do you have a kitchen I can use? The sovereign laughed again. It was a sound like stars being born. Human, she said, we will build you one. 5 years later, a human diplomatic delegation arrived at the origin star. It was the first formal treaty between humanity and the sovereignty. The diplomats were nervous. They had trained for years for this moment. They had studied ancient protocols, learned complex rituals, memorized every known fact about dragonkind. They were not prepared for what greeted them. The sovereign's herald was a human woman. She wore robes made of dragon scale, dark as space and shimmering with inner light. She walked with confidence through halls that should have crushed her with their ancient weight. And behind her, following like playful shadows, came 3 young dragons. They were not small anymore. Ember's head nearly touched the ceiling. Smoke's wings left scorch marks on the walls when he got excited. Ash had grown into her crooked wing, and it gave her flying a distinctive spiral that the other dragons had started to imitate. But when the human woman reached into her pockets and pulled out wrapped treats, they chirped exactly like they had as hatchlings. "Please," Ember said, his voice deep now but still eager. "Thank you," Smoke added, already sniffing at the package. "More spicy?" Ash asked hopefully. The diplomats watched in stunned silence as the herald laughed and distributed the snacks. They had read about her in their briefing materials. The dragon friend, she was called. The human who had earned a place among gods. The briefing had not mentioned that she had done it with good cooking and a soft heart. It had not mentioned that sometimes the greatest weapons were not weapons at all. They were acts of simple kindness, offered freely, expected nothing in return. It had not mentioned that humans were very, very good at that sort of thing. Myra, once a lonely researcher on a frontier world, now herald of the origin star and second mother to royal dragons, looked at the nervous diplomats and smiled. "Welcome," she said. "You must be hungry after your journey. Let me show you to the kitchen." The end.